The dinner table was supposed to bring peace that night. I had cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with herbs and butter, mashed potatoes, just the way he liked them. For a moment, I wanted to believe we were a family again. But life has a cruel way of showing you the truth when you least expect it. My son, Ethan, sat across from me, his face glowing with the arrogance of youth. He scrolled through his phone, barely lifting his eyes. His wife, Lila, whispered something in his ear and giggled. I smiled faintly, pretending not to notice how my presence annoyed them. It wasn't the first time. It had become a pattern, me trying, and them rejecting. Ethan, I said softly, I was thinking we could have dinner together this Sunday again. Maybe invite your sister? He didn't even look up. Mom, let's not do this again. All right? You're over at the house every week. The words cut, but I swallowed the pain. It's just a meal. Ethan, we used to have dinners like this all the time. I thought. He slammed his fork down. You thought wrong. His voice rose, echoing off the dining room walls. You don't get it, do you? You're not part of my life anymore. You're dead to me. The world stopped spinning for a moment. My hand froze on the table. Lila's smirk twisted slightly, as if she enjoyed the power of his cruelty. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the child I had protected, the man I had built a life for. And I didn't recognize him anymore. My throat went dry, but I managed to whisper. What did you just say? You heard me, he sneered. You've done enough damage already. I don't owe you anything. You're just holding on to the past. Move on. He got up from his chair and stormed out, leaving his half-eaten food on the table. Lila followed him, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty plate, the flickering candle, the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat in silence, feeling the cold realization sink in. My son no longer saw me as his mother. But as the silence deepened, another thought began to rise, slowly, powerfully, like a storm brewing beneath calm waters. For years, I had sacrificed everything for him. I sold my jewelry to pay his tuition, worked 2 jobs to keep the house running, and even forgave the way he treated me after his father died. Every scar I carried was from protecting him, and yet here I was, dismissed like a stranger. That night, I went upstairs to the small drawer where I kept the family documents. The old will was there, carefully sealed in an envelope. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, had helped me draft it 10 years ago. In it, I had left nearly everything to Ethan. Our home, my savings, the rental properties I had inherited from my father. I wanted him to have a future, even if mine had ended. But now, as I held that envelope in my hands, I realized something had changed forever. Love, when taken for granted, begins to rot. I placed the will on my desk and looked out the window. The moonlight cast a pale glow on the rose garden Ethan and I had once planted together. Back then, he was just a boy, runing barefoot through the grass, his laughter echoing across the yard. I could still see him there, chasing butterflies, calling, "Mom, look!" But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw kindness as weakness and love as a burden. I closed my eyes and made a silent promise. This would be the last time I cried for him. The next morning, I called Mr. Harris. I need to make some changes to my will, I said. There was a brief pause on the other end. Mrs. Bennett, are you sure? You updated it not too long ago. I'm very sure, I replied. This time, I wanted to reflect the truth. By noon, I was sitting in Mr. Harris's office, signing the new documents with a steady hand. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't remove Ethan entirely. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I rewrote the narrative of his inheritance in a way that would teach him the lesson life had failed to deliver. Would you like to explain the adjustments? Mr. Harris asked politely. Yes, I said, a faint smile forming. I want my estate divided differently. Ethan will receive something, but not what he expects. I'll leave the main house to a foundation in my name, one that supports single mothers and women abandoned by their families. As for the rest, I'll place it in a trust, accessible only if he learns to value people over possessions. Mr. Harris nodded slowly, impressed. That's poetic. Mrs. Bennet. Not poetic, I whispered. Necessary. When I returned home, the house felt strangely lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own memories. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Somewhere deep down, I knew Ethan would come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, when he realized what he had lost. And when that day came, the truth would hit harder than any words ever could. Because love doesn't die when it's rejected. It simply learns how to protect itself. 2 weeks passed, and the silence between Ethan and me grew into an ocean. He didn't call, didn't text, and didn't ask how I was doing. Not even a simple, "Are you okay, Mom?" It was as if I had never existed. But I wasn't surprised anymore. Pain becomes predictable when it comes from those who claim to love you. I filled my days with small things, tending to my garden, reading in the afternoons, baking just enough for myself. For the first time in years, I began to live for me. And yet, every time I walked past the hallway where Ethan's childhood pictures hung, a sting would rise in my chest. That little boy, with the missing front tooth and wide grin, how could he grow into a man who looked at me with disdain? One morning, I received a call from Lila. Her name flashing on my phone made my heart sink. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Mrs. Bennet," she began, her tone unusually sweet. "Ethan's been a little stressed lately. I thought maybe you could talk to him. He's been thinking about some things." I could hear the hesitation in her voice. It wasn't concern. It was calculation. "Thinking about what exactly?" I asked calmly. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "you mentioned a while back about inheritance and all. He's been wondering what your plans are. You know how uncertain life can be, especially with your health and all." My health. The words stung more than they should have. I wasn't dying. I wasn't even sick. But to them, I was just an aging woman nearing her end. A walking wallet with an expiration date. I smiled faintly. "Tell Ethan not to worry. Everything's taken care of." "I'll let him know," she said quickly, before hanging up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window again, watching the moonlight spill across the living room floor. My thoughts circled endlessly. They didn't want me. They wanted what I had. Love had turned into leverage, affection into asset. And yet, deep down, I didn't hate them. I pitied them. Because a person who measures love in terms of money will never understand true wealth. A week later, Ethan finally came to visit. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the sound of expensive tires crunching on gravel. I didn't rush to greet him like I used to. Instead, I waited, calm and collected. He stepped inside, sunglasses perched on his head, phone in hand. "Hey," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "Hello, Ethan," I replied, not looking up from my book. He seemed thrown off by my tone. "So, how've you been?" "I've been well," I said. "You?" He shrugged. "Busy. You know how it is. Life's been hectic." He paused, pretending to glance around. "House looks good. You keeping up with the bills all right?" There it was, the hidden motive, the same question disguised as concern. "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "Everything's in order." He nodded slowly, trying to read me. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking. You've got this big house all to yourself. Maybe it's time you moved somewhere smaller? Something easier to manage?" I set my book down gently. "And what would I do with this house, Ethan?" He hesitated for a second before saying, "Well, Lila and I have been thinking of expanding our family. Maybe we could move in here. You could take the apartment near downtown. It's cozy, quiet, far away from you." I interrupted softly. He blinked, caught off guard. "That's not what I meant." "I think it's exactly what you meant," I said. "Ethan, let me be very clear. I've already made arrangements for everything. The house, the estate, my finances, all of it. You don't have to worry about a thing." He frowned. "Arrangements? What arrangements?" "Things are taken care of," I repeated. His eyes darkened. "You didn't change anything in the will, did you?" I looked him straight in the eyes and said nothing. Silence is the strongest answer when words lose their worth. He scoffed, pacing the room. "Unbelievable. After everything I've done for you." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Everything you've done for me?" He froze. I stood slowly, my voice calm but firm. "Ethan, I raised you alone after your father passed away. I worked until my hands bled so you could have the best education, the best opportunities, the best life. You were my purpose. And when I needed you most, when I asked you for help with the medical bills after my fall, you told me you were too busy." He looked away, guilt flickering briefly, before pride took over again. "That was different. I had expenses, responsibilities. And I didn't," I said sharply. "You've grown so comfortable taking that you've forgotten how to give." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I just want to make sure everything's okay financially." "It's more than okay," I said. "Better than it's ever been." He studied me for a long moment, realizing he couldn't manipulate me anymore. "Fine," he muttered, heading for the door. "But don't expect me to come running when things go south." "I won't," I replied. After he left, I sat down again, feeling strangely peaceful. There was no more fear, no more need to explain myself. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. The following week, I received a letter from the charitable foundation I'd partnered with. They had begun the legal transfer process of the property in my name. Soon, this home, once a symbol of my family, would become a refuge for women abandoned by theirs. The idea made me smile. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was freedom. When you stop begging for love and start building from pain, you don't destroy. You transform. And while my son thought I was fading away quietly, I was, in truth, writing the most powerful chapter of my life. The silence after his outburst felt like a thunderclap in a church. Everyone at the table froze, the kind of stillness that makes the air thick and heavy. I didn't respond. I simply placed my fork down, folded my napkin neatly, and looked at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes filled with defiance. But behind that defiance, I could see something else. Fear. Fear that maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. But I didn't shout. I didn't scold him. I didn't even tell him to apologize. I just said quietly, "All right, David, you've made yourself clear." Then I stood up, cleared my plate, and walked out of the dining room. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My husband, Michael, was gone. Had been for almost 6 years. He used to handle the financial side of everything, and after his passing, I took over, carefully managing the house, the savings, and the inheritance we had set aside for David. That inheritance was meant to give him a start in life, a cushion, a safety net, something to help him when we were gone. But what Michael and I had never planned for was the possibility that our son might turn his back on us before we were even gone. I thought about how David had changed. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when he'd sit with me for hours, helping with groceries, fixing things around the house, asking for advice about his career. He used to say, "Mom, one day I'll buy you a little cottage by the lake." Now, those words felt like echoes from another universe. The next morning, I made a decision, not out of anger, but out of peace. I called my lawyer, Margaret, he said, sounding surprised. It's been a while. How can I help you? I hesitated before answering. I'd like to make some changes to my will, I said softly. There was a pause. Changes? He asked. What kind of changes? The kind, I said, that reflect the truth of my family today, not what I wished it to be. When I arrived at his office, he offered me tea and a sympathetic smile. I told him everything. The way David had grown distant, how he hadn't called me for months before showing up to dinner just to argue, how he told me, in front of his own wife and child, that I was dead to him. I remember his eyes widening slightly. Margaret, he said gently, are you sure you want to do this? I am, I replied. Michael and I worked too hard to build what we had. If David no longer wants to be part of this family, then he shouldn't benefit from what this family built. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. Let's go through your options. We spent the next hour revising every line of the document, removing David's name where it once appeared, adding clauses that redirected the funds to causes I cared about. A scholarship fund for single mothers returning to college, a donation to the local animal shelter, and the remaining assets to my granddaughter, Lily, when she turned 25. As I signed the final page, a strange calm washed over me. Not revenge, not bitterness, just finality. That evening, I sat in my favorite armchair, looking at a photograph on the mantel, one of the three of us, taken when David was 10. His smile back then could light up a whole room. Now, the man I saw at dinner was a stranger, someone who had lost sight of love, blinded by ego and resentment. The next few weeks were quiet. No calls, no messages. The house felt emptier, but in a strange way. It also felt cleaner, like a space cleared of heavy energy, until one morning, the phone rang. It was David. Mom, he said, his voice hesitant. Can we talk? There was something in his tone. Not anger this time, but uncertainty. Of course, I said. When would you like to come over? That Saturday. He arrived with Lily. She ran up to me with her little arms outstretched, shouting, Grandma! I hugged her tightly, breathing in that sweet scent only children seem to have. Innocence, of hope, new beginnings. David sat on the couch, silent for a while, fidgeting with his hands. Finally, he said, I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't respond right away. He continued. I was angry. I felt like you were controlling everything. The house, the money, the decisions. I thought you didn't trust me. His words tumbled out fast, like he'd been rehearsing them. David, I said gently, trust isn't given. It's earned. And love isn't a debt. It's a gift. You don't demand it. You nurture it. He looked down, tears welling in his eyes. I miss Dad, he whispered. So do I replied. For a moment, we just sat there, mother and son, the ghosts of anger slowly dissolving in the quiet. But deep down, I knew something he didn't. The will was already changed, and I wasn't going to undo it. Not yet. Because forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Sometimes, it simply means wishing someone peace, even as you protect your own. When they left that afternoon, Lily turned back at the door and waved. Bye, Grandma. I love you. I waved back, smiling. I love you too, sweetheart. After they drove away, I stood by the window, watching their car disappear down the street. Then, quietly, I whispered, maybe one day you'll understand. A month passed, and peace began to settle into my life like an old friend returning home. I tended to my garden again, pruning the roses Michael had planted years ago. I baked bread on Sundays and spent evenings reading by the fireplace. It wasn't the life I imagined in my later years. I'd hoped for family dinners, laughter, and little feet running through the halls. But it was a life of quiet dignity. Then came a letter, a simple, white envelope, with my lawyer's return address on it. At first, I thought it was a confirmation copy of my will adjustments. But as I opened it, I realized it was something else. Inside was a note from my lawyer that read, "Margaret, just a courtesy reminder that your son is still listed as co-executor on the original deed to your property. If you'd like to remove him, please contact me." I hadn't realized that detail was still unchanged. The house, this house, the one Michael and I built from the ground up, was still partially under David's administrative rights should anything happen to me. Ich sehe deeply. I knew what I had to do next. The following Monday, I went back to the law office. "Let's take his name off," I told my lawyer. He nodded, pulling out the necessary forms. As I signed each paper, a small weight lifted from my chest. It wasn't just about property or inheritance anymore. It was about reclaiming peace, the kind that doesn't rely on someone else's approval or affection. Over the next few weeks, I didn't hear from David again. But I didn't chase him either. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in the shadow of his choices. I took morning walks, joined a small book club, even volunteered at the local shelter. Lily would still call sometimes with her mother. "Mommy says I can come see you next weekend." And I'd smile every time. At least one bond in this tangled web had remained pure. Then, one evening, as I was locking up the house, I heard a knock at the door. It was nearly 9 p.m. When I opened it, there he was, David. His face was pale, his eyes tired, his clothes wrinkled. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "I need your help." He hesitated. The same man who once told me I was dead to him now stood before me, desperate and small, like the little boy who used to run to me after scraping his knee. "Come in," I said softly. He sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea I'd made for him, but barely touching it. After a long silence, he spoke. "I lost the house," he said. I froze. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "The investments didn't work out. The business collapsed. I tried to fix things, but..." His voice broke. "We've been evicted. Mom, we're staying in a motel. I don't know what to do." My heart sank, not because of the money, but because of how lost he sounded. All his pride, his anger, his ego, it had led him to this point. And the saddest part? I had seen it coming. "I warned you," I whispered. "You pushed everyone away, including me." He buried his face in his hands. "I know. God, I know." I walked to the window, staring out at the garden where Michael's rose bushes swayed in the evening breeze. Part of me wanted to rush to him, hold him, to fix everything, like mothers always do. But another part remembered that night at dinner. The words that cut deeper than any blade. "You're dead to me." I turned back to him. "What is it you need, David?" I asked calmly. He looked up, eyes glistening. "I just need some money to get back on my feet. I know you still have the savings Dad left. Please, Mom, just a little. I'll pay it back." There it was again. That word, money. Not love. Not forgiveness. Not help me understand where I went wrong. Just money. I took a slow breath. "David," I said, "do you remember what you said to me that night?" He nodded, ashamed. "I do. And do you understand what it meant? To tell your mother, who gave you everything, that she's dead to you?" His lip trembled. I was angry. "I know. But words matter, David. You built a wall between us that night, and now you're standing outside of it, asking me to let you back in." He didn't respond. I walked to a drawer near the hallway and took out an envelope. The revised will, sealed and complete. I placed it on the table between us. "This," I said, "is the life you chose." He looked at it, confused. "What is this?" "My will," I said. "It's done. Signed. Finalized." His eyes widened. "You changed it?" "Yes. The inheritance. The savings, the property, it no longer belongs to you. He stared at me, speechless. Instead, it will go to Lily when she's old enough to handle it wisely. He slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this to me. I didn't flinch. I already did, I said quietly. The room went still. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. Finally, he stood up, his voice rising. You're punishing me because I made mistakes? You're my mother. I'm not punishing you, I said softly. I'm protecting what's left of this family. You turned your back on love when you thought money was more important. Now you get to live with that choice. He stared at me, fury and disbelief twisting his face. Then, without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. I stood there for a long time, the echoes of his footsteps fading down the street. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't cry. I just whispered to the empty room, "Goodbye, my son." Outside, the wind howled through the garden, scattering rose petals across the porch, like tiny pieces of something once beautiful, now gone. The next morning, I woke up to a heavy silence, the kind that fills a house after something irreversible happens. I walked through the halls, touching the old family photos that still hung on the walls. David as a boy, his first day at school, the summer we went camping, Michael holding him on his shoulders. So much life, so much love, frozen in time. But now, all I could think of was how far apart we had drifted. It wasn't sudden. It had been happening for years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden, pruning the roses again. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the ache that comes after too much strength. I thought of Lily, her innocence, her laughter, the way she still believed everyone in the world was kind. I knew that belief wouldn't last forever, but maybe, just maybe, I could protect her long enough to grow into someone who understood love without greed. 3 weeks passed. I hadn't heard a single word from David, but one evening I received a small package at my door. Inside was a photograph, a picture of him and Lily at the motel. She was smiling, clutching his arm, her joy untouched by circumstance. Underneath the photo was a short note in David's handwriting. Thank you for raising her right. I'm sorry for everything. I'm trying to be better. Love. D. For a long moment, I just stared at the note, my eyes blurring with tears. I didn't know whether to believe him, but for the first time in years, his words weren't demanding, entitled, or defensive. They were human, and that, in itself, was something. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. The house grew quieter, but not empty. I filled my days with things that made me feel alive again. Teaching Lily to bake cookies when she visited, joining the neighborhood choir, even learning to paint. Each brushstroke, each note, each laugh stitched back a little piece of the woman I had lost while trying to hold a family together that no longer wanted to be held. Then, one cold winter morning, as I was sipping my tea by the window, I saw a familiar figure standing by the gate. It was David. He looked different, older, humbler, and somehow lighter. He stood there, hesitant, unsure whether to come in. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. His voice wasn't sharp this time. It carried the kind of weight that only comes after a person has finally met their own reflection and didn't like what they saw. "Hi, David," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in, it's cold." He walked into the living room, looking around. "It's just like I remember," he murmured. "It's been the same," I said softly. "Except for the peace dot, it's new." He gave a faint smile. "I can tell." We sat by the fire, the warmth wrapping around us. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Mom, I've been working again. Not at a company, just a small carpentry shop. I'm saving up, slowly. I just wanted you to know that I'm not the same man who walked out of here that night. I looked at him for a long time. His eyes, once so full of arrogance, now carried sincerity. People change when they finally run out of excuses, I said quietly. He nodded. You're right. I was blind, selfish, and cruel. I thought money made me powerful. I thought love was a debt. I was wrong about everything. For the first time in a long time, I reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, hands that had worked, struggled, survived. I don't hate you, David, I said. I never did. I just couldn't keep saving someone who didn't want to be saved. Tears filled his eyes. I know, Mom, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say thank you for not completely giving up on me. I smiled faintly. I didn't give up on you. I just gave up the illusion that I could control your choices. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly, the clock ticked, and somewhere in the distance, the wind hummed through the trees. Finally, he looked up. How's Lily? She's good. Growing fast. She asks about you. His eyes softened. Tell her I'm proud of her. I'll tell her, I said. But maybe you should tell her yourself. He smiled. A genuine one this time. Maybe I will. He stayed for dinner that night. We talked about everything and nothing. The weather, old memories, even Michael. There were moments of silence, moments of laughter, and moments where both of us struggled to find the right words. But something fragile and beautiful was rebuilding itself in those pauses. When he left, he hugged me, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of love. Real, quiet love. And in that moment, I realized something. Changing the will hadn't been an act of revenge. It had been an act of survival. It had forced both of us to face the truth that family isn't about inheritance or entitlement. It's about learning, losing, and loving, in spite of the hurt. Weeks later, Lily came over again, chattering about school. She handed me a drawing she'd made, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sundae. That's you, me, and Daddy, she said proudly. I smiled. It's beautiful, sweetheart. As she ran off to play, I pinned the drawing on the fridge. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to see us together. It felt healing. That night, as I sat by the fire once more, I thought about all that had happened. The anger, the heartbreak, the silence, the forgiveness. I thought about the boy I'd raised and the man he had become. I thought about how love, even when broken, never truly disappears. It just changes shape. Outside, the snow began to fall gently, covering the garden in white. The roses slept beneath the frost, waiting for spring, and I smiled, knowing they would bloom again, just like we had.